Hi, this is Kevin Baumer, CML Deputy Director. Welcome to the Friday, April 13th edition of the CML Statehouse Report. We are down to 26 days left in the legislative session. Things are really starting to get moving, and I'm going to talk about a few key issues that are going to be coming up in the days ahead. First of all, we're finally going to have some movement on beer and liquor, particularly fermented malt beverage licenses and what happens to them after January 1st, 2019. The Senate Majority Leader's bill, Senator Chris Holbert from Douglas County, will be introduced on Monday and likely heard in committee as soon as Wednesday afternoon. That bill will have a whole lot of moving parts as it relates to the future of liquor licensing, and because it was very controversial when parts of that were discussed back in February, we're not 100% sure it is going to move forward and pass all the way through. The bill does have language in it that CML has asked for. I'll talk more about that in a second as it relates to school distance restrictions. But there's also a component that will deal with public consumption. Right now in some municipalities, public consumption is allowed in public parks and public spaces as well as in state parks. Municipalities will have the option to allow that, and obviously as it pertains to fermented malt beverages now meaning full strength beer, malt liquor, the statute will have to change. The bill, when it's introduced, won't have quite the right language. We'll continue to work on that to make sure if it does move forward, we'll have complete 100% local option. I mentioned there might be language, or there is going to be language that CML has asked for, but because of the concern about that legislation perhaps not making it all the way through, the League's pursuing separate legislation. We don't have yet permission to have a late bill introduced, but I'm working on that would deal with three very specific things. Making sure that future fermented malt beverage licenses issued to convenience stores or grocery stores for off-premise consumption are 500 feet from a school, if one exists, and like the rest of the liquor code, the municipality or the county, if in the unincorporated area, would have the ability to reduce or eliminate those distance restrictions. Also, we want to have local option to impose a moratorium on new licenses through the end of this year, because we're already starting to see folks applying to get in under the rules as they exist now, and want to make sure that the distance restriction, if that's enacted, would apply. And last, the ability for local governments to consider whether or not there are a number of too many other licenses already in an area. That's done through a process called determination of undue concentration, and the ability to deny a fermented malt beverage application if there's a determination of too many fermented malt beverage licenses, liquor license drugstores, or retail liquor stores. So a lot of moving parts with that. Stay tuned. Next week is going to be a very busy week in beer and liquor. Marijuana issues, I've mentioned House Bill 1258 previously. This is the accessory consumption establishment, local option to allow accessory consumption establishments that are connected to existing retail stores, not physically connected, but in fact they're not allowed to be physically connected, but connected in terms of the business model. Local option, that passed the House. CML was neutral on the bill with all of the changes that were made, and that was introduced in the Senate Finance Committee, which is an important development because previous legislation that has run into trouble died in Senate Business, Labor, and Technology. We believe it actually has a chance of passing out of Senate Finance and perhaps all the way through the General Assembly. A new bill that I want to mention is probably mostly specific to Denver, but I mention it anyway. It's House Bill 1389, which would allow for centralized marijuana distribution for optional premises cultivation or retail cultivation premises, and it would allow the state to issue a permit for centralized distribution to their various affiliate businesses, common ownership. We looked at it because it only has state permission. There's no involvement of the local authorities in that, and we've asked to be able to be considered, at least for notification. We might push so far as to have local approval, and that's still in discussion. That's House Bill 1389. And then among the slew of bills that are being introduced here in the waning days of the session are several employment-related bills I want to make sure folks are aware of. And I'll just say up front, I don't think any of them will ultimately pass. But this may be a precursor to the next legislative session, so worth paying attention to the issues. One that will probably get the most attention is House Bill 1368. We've seen versions of this bill in the past that would allow a local government to establish a local minimum wage. This one's a little bit different in that it actually includes affirmative language that would allow a local government to exceed the constitutional minimum wage that's in our state constitution. This goes back and undoes a 1999 bill that prohibited local governments from establishing a minimum wage. And just as far as a little history lesson goes, the League didn't take a position on that bill way back then because we felt we were already preempted, our members, from establishing a local minimum wage based on previous Supreme Court decisions in the area of private labor regulation. So that'll be a discussion going forward, but CML will be neutral on that bill. And it should generate a lot of discussion. Two others that are worth noting: House Bill 1377, which would prohibit requirement of an applicant to provide salary info, and House Bill 1378, which is an equal pay for equal work bill. Both of those will get a lot of attention, but again, not likely to survive through the Senate.
Hi, this is Megan Dollar, Legislative and Policy Advocate here at the Colorado Municipal League. I want to highlight a few pieces of legislation that I worked on this week. The first one being Senate Bill 84. Senate Bill 84 did provide immunity to certain victims of human trafficking, particularly minors, in crimes surrounding that, including prostitution and equivalent municipal ordinance violations. CML had some concerns with the legislation. We felt like it was a bit broad, and we're working with the Colorado District Attorney's Council to see if we could narrow that legislation. Unfortunately, we did not get there with that piece of legislation, and so Senate Bill 84 was postponed indefinitely in the Senate Judiciary Committee Monday of this week. Yesterday in the House Judiciary Committee, CML followed a number of pieces of legislation, including House Bill 1353, which is CML's initiated legislation to create a grant funding program in order to fund House Bill 1309 that was passed, that requires that requires defense counsel at first appearance in municipal court. That bill did pass on a vote of 8-3, and we look forward to attaching the funding that's already in the state budget of $2 million to that piece of legislation in House Appropriations. Another bill that House Judiciary took up yesterday was House Bill 1287. What that bill does is reauthorize the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice here in Colorado. It's a commission that makes recommendations to the Governor's Office, to the General Assembly, and to the Supreme Court on policy changes in Colorado's criminal justice system. CML is in support of that legislation now that an amendment was added yesterday in committee that actually adds a municipal representative on the CCJJ, and we're very happy and glad that the sponsor, Representative Weissman, was willing to work with us on that, and so we can have some insight on that commission as well.
Hello, this is Diane Criswell, and I know I haven't talked to you guys in a couple weeks. A lot of my bills have been enacted or have kind of fallen off at the wayside at some point, but I've got a couple new bills to talk to you about this week. A bill that has yet to be introduced, and then the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is House Bill 1190. That's currently in House Appropriations with a bunch of other tax bills, so they hold the tax bills until the long bill, the appropriations bill, has passed, and they kind of know what they're looking at as far as what they can afford for tax bills. So that bill extends the tax credit that supports Main Street revitalization, and it extends it for 10 years. It's set to expire in 2019. So if you have done some sort of preservation project or Main Street revitalization with those resources, you might want to reach out to the Appropriations Committee members, to the Joint Budget Committee, and potentially to the Governor's Office to let them know that you support the bill. Now, I've reached out to a few of you. I'm going to be reaching out to some more folks that have received those resources. But anyway, just let folks know that you value that as a tool for your community. On the bills that were recently introduced, House Bill 1383 kind of broadens the scope of performance bonds for public works contracts. So many of you are looking at a P3 public-private partnership. I always have to say that kind of slow. And they are becoming more common. And so what the bill does is for contractors and subcontractors that are working on those kinds of projects, requiring those performance bonds, even when the project is not solely in every aspect a public project, when there's also public financing or public money or I'm sorry, private money or private financing or similar things. NCML is neutral on the bill. We were able to work with the folks that are the proponents to get some of the clarifications. So the input that I've received from many of you, thank you for taking a look at that. We got a lot of the changes and clarifications necessary to make it easy for us to implement, and I've received no objections to the policy of the bill. So, but as always, send me your comments. On Senate Bill 233, this is a bill that comes out of some work by the Secretary of State's office to update Title I elections. Now, for home rule folks or even statutory cities and towns, we're not necessarily following Title I. Most of us are following Title 31 for our elections procedures, although Title I sets out the requirements for those coordinated elections, and Senate Bill 233 does impact some of the timelines that we follow for those elections. Now, if your city or town has adopted in its own charter or ordinances some of the specific dates for coordinated elections, the bill may require you to take a look at those dates and to update them if this bill becomes law. But for the most part, it's making necessary technical and other updates to electronic notifications, other aspects of Title I elections. CML is neutral on the bill. The last bill that I wanted to talk to you about today is a bill that has not yet been born, has been introduced, but there have been some conversations coming out of the House about requiring internal investigations of a peace officer to be open, similar to kind of an open records request. And there are legal and policy considerations that I've heard about, and that Megan Dollar, who has also staffed the issue, I think for a lot of our members, those internal investigations are not criminal investigations. They are generally viewed as personnel or other procedures that we like to, for a variety of policy reasons, not necessarily publish those in the public forum unless there's a compelling reason to do so. There can be officer safety issues and other privacy rights concerns on the officer side when you're talking about making those completely open to the public. On the other side, I think that there's a lot of folks that are interested in getting as much transparency from the government as possible. Now, I just note I staff open records at the League, and I think that a lot of our members' experience in receiving and processing open records requests is very different than the public perception, which is that we work hard to respond to those requests and to provide public records, except when we are not permitted to by statute or other law. So I do know that many of you in an internal investigations context are working when appropriate to be responsive to a call for those records. And we are working with the potential bill sponsors to try to understand what the policy goals are and to try to see if there's an opportunity to come to some sort of understanding of what may be information that we can provide that doesn't impact officer safety or have other, concerning results.
Hello, this is Morgan Cullen with the Colorado Municipal League, and this was another busy week down at the Colorado General Assembly. Two bills that I've been working on this week were up. The first was up in State Affairs, Senate Bill 196, that would repeal a key provision of Colorado's FASTER law passed in 2009. that would repeal the late fee charged on registrations. After a 30-day grace period, vehicles that are late on their registration are charged $25 per month up to $100. This would repeal that provision, and CML was opposing the bill because it would cost municipalities $3 million per year in transportation funding. Absent a statewide transportation funding solution in Colorado, we need to have all of those dollars going directly to municipality to cover our infrastructure challenges across the state. So that bill died 6-3 in state affairs. The second bill was Senate Bill 3, which CML was supporting. And this was the reauthorization of the Colorado Energy Office. As you know, Senate Bill 301 last year died in the final days of session, and that included a reauthorization of the Energy Office. The Energy Office has been running for the last 10 months on some additional federal funding that they were provided. But that's really it. And so it was a priority, given all the programs that the Energy Office provides and the assistance that they provide to local governments. This was a priority for CML this year. And that bill passed unanimously out of House Transportation, and it's onto the floor. And hopefully by the end of next week, it'll be before the governor's desk.
So that's all for this week, a fairly lengthy report, and we expect, again, a lot of action in these waning days. You can be sure to stay up to date on what's going on by following us on our website, watching our Twitter feed. You can link to bills that we are following through the links on this report, as well as our support and oppose bills. And always, if you have any questions, please just contact us.